also going to talk about the policy resistance. We had 4 cases. 2 of them were on the same topic, a little different, but still the guys will talk about that later. And we had different topics. For example, do you know anything about the garbage disposal in
Sardinia, Italy?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Did anyone hear about that?
Can you repeat about what?
In the about the garbage disposal in Sardinia.
I heard about something about Nepal.
Huh?
I heard something about Nepal, but
not Naples.
Yeah.
Sardinia.
No.
Yeah, but kind of.
Yeah. So, and the other one, did anyone hear anything about the birth rates of Romania? Yeah, you read it in the article. So that were our topics. The main point of those was that the policy resistance was really visual there, but first the thing was that they implemented very strong policies, but they didn't think about the future resistances. So it was a very positive, very quick, rapid growth. So it was people were very happy, but after just a couple of months, everything got destroyed. It was just dropping and dropping and dropping. So that was our cases, and the guys' cases.
We did about the drug war in the USA.
The what?
The war on drugs.
Yeah.
Okay. In the 1970s. So actually started way before that. Started around in, I think it was the very first act of prohibition was like in the late 1800s, and then of course it kept moving on from there. And I think it was Reagan who was the first to be. Oh no, it was Nixon at the beginning, and he came up with the act. What was it called? The Anti-Drug Abuse Act. He came up with that, and that was like that set the sort of like the start of a bunch of other acts that would come up later on in order to try to combat drugs in the US.
Yeah, so he installed a lot of policies. He was the first president to actively declare the war on drugs. But after the resistance, it seemed to be improving, so there wasn't policy resistance. But around the 80s, when it was President Reagan, he implemented even harsher measurements against drugs. And he implemented the law that said that if you have a small amount of drugs on you, you're still going to get incarcerated for 5 years in ridiculous amounts.
Minimum 5 years, yeah.
Yeah, and that's when the policy resistance shot up. So we measured the policy resistance in terms of drug overdose and people incarcerated. Because if you think about it, if there's less people who consume drugs, there should be less overdoses. And if all the criminals who are dealing drugs are in prisons, then the rate should remain the same. It shouldn't be rocketing high. And the consumption of drugs itself. So what we saw was that the consumption of drugs, it was actually the same, increasing slightly. The amount of overdoses was rising, and the amount of incarcerated people for drugs went skyrocketed. And even today, it's at this insane number, which is about 200% increase from what it was in the 60s. So
you just put more people to the prison and nothing happened to the actual
nothing.
Exactly, and there was
happened.
even a statistic which was done by a professor at the university. I don't honestly remember the university's name, but he said that each year you spend in prison, you have a 5.6% increase on the chance to reoffend. So if anything, this policy wasn't really helping with the situation. What it was doing, it was making small-time criminals and potentially turning them into like big-time criminals.
Yeah. So why we grouped ours together, apart from the fact it's the same topic, was that it was long-term policy resistance. So at the start, it was very slow, but then it skyrocketed over the course of 40 years. And there we saw a contrast between Anastasia's and Andrea's, because
ours was short. Like we had a really, as we already previously said, it was positive, very positive in like for a few months, for maximum a year, and then it was total disaster.
Okay.
Which never almost stopped.
One thing else is you've heard about drug busts.
Mm-hmm.
They attack to a corner and then they bust whatever they find.
Mm-hmm.
There was another study done about drug busts.
Mm-hmm.
When there's a drug bust like that, supply is cut for that segment of the city. When the supply is cut, demand doesn't change because of the reinforcing addiction loop, right? Or you can look at it as a balancing thing, because you're an addict to balance something else out in your life in the wrong way, right? So the demand didn't change, supply was reduced, prices went up. When the prices went up, crime went up. So the reason for which this thing happened in the first place, they say, people in the police department coming up with ideas like, we want to have every ounce of drug to be cleaned from this neighborhood for good, right? They go, they clean it up, because they have this idea that whether it's drugs sold or whatever, there's crimes happening as well. But in fact, that's not the way it is. You caught that, you increase the crimes.
But like, fun fact is like, you know how they started banning weed? Like in America, is because they also, a lot of Jamaicans and like Cubans and like foreigners were going to the West with weed, and at the time was like nothing. So for them to control the immigration and not having these people living there, they banned weed. So
they wouldn't go.
Yeah, because then they could like actually, when they caught them, it's illegal, they can deport them.
Also, alcohol, if it was found now, would be classed as a classic drug as well.
Yeah.
Same as weed.
Yeah.
Okay,
So that was about our policy
Very nice,
resistance.
very
Now
nice.
we're moving on to our presentation about system thinking in systems.